And now stay tuned for our feature with watercolors and instructor Alex Carr. I cannot even remember a time when I wasn't interested in sketch, just picking up a pencil and sketching. My mother is an artist. She's also a school teacher. My father is a physics professor, but also very artistic. So I was surrounded by that at home when I grew up. I am Alex Carr, and I'm a watercolor artist here in Loudoun County. The light and the transparency, to me, there's nothing like it. It's like looking at a stained glass window. The light goes through the paint, bounces off the paper, and comes back through the paint. You cannot capture that kind of light with a paint where the surface reflects the light and the color. It's very opaque. And you can use acrylics in a transparent way. But the heavy look that oil paintings have, that they're known for, that to me was frustrating at times when I couldn't get the light, airy look that I wanted. When I was about 2 years into college, I took a summer class just for the fun of it when I was up in Boston and fell in love with it. And I've been doing that on my own ever since. And I have taken workshops from other artists when I get the chance. But most of it has been self-study and self-taught. And with a strong studio art background and a strong drawing background, it's not a particularly difficult transition to make. But the medium itself is challenging. It's tricky. Get more confidence in all aspects of creating a painting the more you do it, and that's what's wonderful about the situation I'm in now. I can come up here every day and sketch or work on a painting, and so I'm involved in it all the time, and you progress so much faster when that's the case. I have a book on the Hubble deep space photographs, and I love the colors that they're able to get with some of the images in outer space, and it just inspired me to try and do some of this loose pouring techniques, but with really, really deep dark colors, and then of course preserving all of the stars of different sizes. That was a real challenge. Since we've come here, we've built out this studio, and now I teach. I had taught for Blue Ridge Fine Arts initially here in Purcellville, and when they closed, my students wanted to know where they were going to go. So we decided we'd go ahead and, walk out on that limb and build this studio. I used to teach in real traditional settings, and I asked myself when we decided we were going to build this out, what would I want if I could do whatever I wanted to try and set this up to be able to teach the way I wanted to teach? And this is what we came up with. Individual workstations. Everything is included in the price of the class, and it's standardized. All of the paints, professional grade paints, we have about 24 of them, are included in the class. Paper, palettes, brushes, value markers, pencils, masking fluid, anything that you might use in creating watercolor painting is included. You bring nothing. I work with the students. This is a semi-private class right here, and I work between two students, and I demonstrate everything before I ask them to do it, so that if there's anything that they're not sure how they're going to approach it, if they're not sure how they're going to get that particular color, they ask their questions while I'm doing it, and they get a full understanding so that when they do it, their result is much more likely to be something they're happy with. This is mine. I'm working here, and you can see this is another of my students. And we are getting very similar results in terms of colors and proportions, though they each have their own personality, which is what you want, and they always do. I think it's huge to be good at drawing if you want to have a good painting. I have found that with students, if they know where they're going to paint something, a particular color, they have a much easier time actually getting the result they want, because all of a sudden when you have a paintbrush filled with paint, it's a bit paralyzing when you're new at something. And it's like, what if I put it in the wrong place? Well, if you have a good drawing, you know where you're going to put your paint. I use a light box most of the time, especially in teaching, because I think it takes a lot of the stress off the students. I do my drawing on a regular sheet of paper, and then I transfer it using a light box. It's like a little miracle, because also if you make a mistake on your painting and you just totally blow it, you still have your original drawing so that you can make do a whole other painting without having to go through the original routine again. And then it's more about technique. How much paint, how dark, what transition, how wet should the paper be, and that's enough to be thinking about without having to think about, is the brush in the exact right place. Most people are interested in pouring, so by request I almost always run one class on pouring. We have put together in here, these little cups, some diluted paint. First one would be yellow, so I've wet down the whole surface so that the water and the paint make for soft transitions and no sharp lines. And I can manipulate the colors like this to go more in one direction or another, or I can just pour it down like this if I want like shafts of sunlight, depending on what your subject matter is. You have this underlying softness in the light that gives a continuity to the whole painting and gives such delicate transitions that only watercolor can really do. You can tell I'm kind of a paint junkie. This is all of my paints, but I divide them up into color categories. You have a black ink line, or you can use a pencil, make it a graphite line, but you want it to be consistent all the way across. This helps you figure out what each paint can do so that you don't make a mistake in the paint that you choose. You put your color across that line once the ink is dry, and you go from a darker saturation to a lighter saturation, and the line underneath shows how transparent the color is. This is a way of learning something about your paints that helps you throughout every single class that you take, because you're learning what your paints can do. Technique for watercolor is really important because the paint handles differently from any other paint, and if you know what you're doing, it's not a lesson in frustration. A lot of people become very frustrated with watercolor because they just haven't figured out how to use it. And it took me a lot of years, but I've got a few things figured out, and those things I can pass along to other people so that they're not so frustrated. They can take them and then they can go and create things that are more original, more from inside of who they are, but you can't get there without learning technique. This is really good for me as an artist because it forces me to define and articulate my process. You can't teach something if you haven't really defined it so that you can explain it to somebody else. And while that's good for my students, it's also really good for me.
Thanks for watching this edition of Artscape. Please stay with us next week as we find great art and artists throughout our area. I'm Judy Sheehan. See you next time.